Hey, welcome back. My name is Sushant Sutish, and I am your trainer for this AZ-104 Azure Administrator Associate Examination course. We have just completed Module 4 of AZ-104, and we have learned about Azure Virtual Networking. In this video, we're going to go through the review questions on virtual networking. All right, so let's look at the first question. Your company has an existing Azure tenant named a domain name .onmicrosoft.com. The company wants to start using another domain name, which is a custom domain name for their Azure resources. You add a custom domain name to Azure. Now you need to add a DNS record to prepare for verifying the custom domain. Which two of the record type would you create? And you need to select two answers. So if you remember when we talked about the DNS and the custom domain, and we went through two record types which we need to add to verify a custom domain name. I'm not sure whether you remember it. The two records we talked about are the text record and the MX record. So the correct answer is text and MX record. So by default, Azure will prompt you to create a custom text record in the DNS zone to verify a custom domain. Optionally, you can use an MX record instead. The result is the same. Other record types are not supported. Let's look at the question number 2. You're planning to configure networking in Microsoft Azure. Your company has new Microsoft Azure presence with the following network characteristics: one virtual network and one subnet using an IP, and does not have any existing resources, and your on-premises data center have the following network characteristics. And we have 10 subnets using the same network range. So the company intended to use 192.168.1.0 on-premises and 192.168.0.0/24 in Azure. And you need to update the company environment to enable the needed functionality. What should you do? And we have to pick two answers to complete the solution. So the first step we have to do is we have to delete 192.168.0.0/23 from Azure, because it overlaps with 192.168.1.0, which is intended to use for the on-premises. So that is the first step we have to do. And the second is we need to create a new subnet in Azure. So definitely not deleting the second one. The third option is create a mismatch public subnet in Azure and on-premises. That is not the right answer. Is it creating a subnet for 192.168.0.23 in the on-premises environment? Definitely not. We have to create a subnet in Azure because we deleted a subnet from Azure. So the correct answer is create a subnet for 192.168.0.0/24 in Azure. And this is to enable the usage in Azure. Let's look at question number 3. You're planning your Azure network implementation to support your company's migration to Azure. Your first task is to prepare for the deployment of the first set of VMs. And the first set of VMs that you are deploying have the following requirements. So what are these requirements? Customers on the internet must be able to communicate directly with the web application on the VMs. And the IP configuration must be the zone redundant. All right, so we know what are the requirements from the customer. Let's read the further question. You need to configure the environment to prepare for the first VM. Additionally, you need to minimize the cost whenever possible while still meeting the requirements. So what should you do? You need to select one answer. So let's go and read this statement and figure out what should we do to meet this requirement. Is it creating a basic IP address after the first VM created and remove the private IP address and assign the public IP address to the NIC? It is not going to resolve the problem. The basic IP address is not what we are looking at. Again, second option is create a basic public IP address during the creation of first VM. Again, the basic IP address is not gonna cut out. Another option is create a standard public IP address. We need a standard public IP address. After the first VM is created, and remove the private IP address and assign the public IP address. No, we don't have to remove the public IP address. So we don't have to remove the private IP address. All right, so the next option is create a standard public IP address during the creation of the first VM. Associate the public IP address for the VM next. Absolutely correct. So to meet the requirement of communicating directly with the consumers on the internet, you must use a public IP address. And to meet the requirement of having a zone redundant configuration, you must use a standard public IP address. And of the answer choice, only the answer that creates the standard public IP address first, then associate it during the VM creation, and functions meet the requirement. All right, so let's look at the next question. You deploy a new domain name contoso.com to the domain controllers in Azure, and you have the following domain join machine. I have VM1, VM2, VM3, and VM4. Each VMs have an IP address as well, 10, 11, 12, and 101. So I have VM1, VM2, VM3, and VM99. And the IP address of VMs are 10, 11, 12, and 101. You need to add DNS records so that host names resolve their respective IP addresses. Additionally, you need to add a DNS record so that internet.contoso.com resolves to VM99. So what should you do? And we need to pick two answers to complete the whole solution. So we learned about these different types of records and how you can add these records in the DNS in the previous module. So the correct answer is adding a record and a CNAME record. So let me explain you why this is the correct answer. In this scenario, the host name have IPv4 IP addresses. Thus, to resolve these host name, you must add a name record for each VMs. To enable internet.contoso.com to resolve in VM99.contoso.com, you need to add a CNAME record. A CNAME record is often referred to as an alias. Your company is preparing to move some services and VMs to Microsoft Azure. The company has opted to use Azure DNS to provide name resolution. A project begins to configure the name resolution, and the project identifies following requirements. So let's understand the requirements first. The first requirement is a new domain will be used, and then a domain will be, and the second requirement is a domain will have a DNS record for internal and external resources. And the third requirement is minimize ongoing administrative overhead. Right. So you need to prepare and configure the environment with a new domain name and a test host of www. Which is the following steps should you perform? And we need to choose three answers to complete the solution. So let's go through the options. Register a domain name with the domain registrar. Absolutely. So if you need to get the domain right and you need to have a www. You need to register the domain name first, which is correct. Register a domain name with Microsoft Azure. Definitely not. That is not possible at all. You need to register a domain name with a domain registrar. Next option is delegate the new domain name to Azure DNS. Absolutely correct. You need to delegate the domain name to Azure DNS. You need to add address A record to Azure name server. So you don't need to add an A record in this instance. And add a DNS glue records to point to Azure name servers. Again, you don't have to do that. And add a record for www. Absolutely correct. So you need to add a www record to complete the solution. So for private domain names, you must register with a registrar because Azure isn't a registrar. Thereafter, you need to delegate the new domain name to Azure DNS, which enables the Azure DNS to be the authority for the domain. After delegation, you should add a test host of www and test name resolution. All right, let's look at the question number 6. You have a VM with two NICs named NIC1 and NIC2. NIC1 is connected to this IP address subnet, and NIC2 is connected to another IP subnet. The only difference is 8.0 and 20.8. You plan to upgrade the VM configuration to provide the following functionality. So what are the VM configurations? The first configuration is enable direct communication from internet to TCP port 443. Second configuration change is maintain existing communication across 10.10.8.0/24 and 10.20.8.0/24 subnets, and maintain a simple configuration whenever possible. You need to update the VM configuration to support the new functionality. So what should you do? So you have a lot of changes here. So what are you going to do to make sure that you update the VM's configuration to support all these new functionality? So let's read out the statements. Remove the private IP address from NIC2 and then assign public IP address to it, and then create an inbound security role. Definitely not the right answer because it's add more complexity to the existing solution. Second statement, add a third NIC and associate public IP address to it, and then create an inbound security role. Again, absolutely wrong. It is not even going to resolve the problem. Third option is associate a public IP address to NIC and create an inbound security role. Absolutely correct. To enable direct communication from internet to the VM, you must have a public IP address. You also need an inbound security rule. And you can associate the public IP address with NIC1 and NIC2, although in this scenario only presents an option to associate it with NIC2. So this is the correct answer. Let's look at question number 7. You are currently using Network Security Group or NSGs to control how your network traffic flows in and out of your virtual network subnet and network interfaces. You want to customize how your NSGs work. All right, so you need to customize your NSGs. For all incoming traffic, you need to apply your security rules to both the virtual machine and at the subnet level. Which of the following options will let you accomplish this? So we need to choose two answers to complete the solution. So let's read the options. Configure the allow VNet inbound security rule for all NSGs. That is not going to help it. Create rules for both NICs and subnet with the allow action. Absolutely correct. You should add rules with higher priority than the default rule if need. All right, that's the correct answer. Delete the default rule. You won't be able to delete the default rule. That is not possible. The last option is add rules with higher priorities than the default rule. Absolutely correct. So because you cannot delete the default rules, you can override it by adding the higher priority. So the correct answer is 2 and 4. So you should add rules with higher priority than the default rules if needed, as you cannot delete the default rules. Also, in order to meet the requirement to apply security rules to both VMs and subnet level, you should create rules with an allow action for both. And there is no need to configure the allow VNet inbound rule, as it has a default rule for any new security group you create. All right, let's look at the question number 8. You need to ensure that Azure DNS can resolve names for your registered domain. What should you implement? We just need to select one answer. And the correct answer is zone delegation. Once you create the DNS zone in Azure DNS, you need to set up NS record in the parent zone to ensure that Azure DNS is the authoritative source for your name resolution for your zone. For domains purchased from a registrar, your registrar will offer the option to set up those NS records. When delegating a domain to Azure DNS, you must use the name server names provided by the Azure DNS. Domain delegation does not require the name server name to use the same top level domain as your domain. All right, let's look at the last question. You are configuring the Azure firewall. You need to allow Windows Update network traffic through the firewall. Which of the following should you use? You need to select just one answer. It's not network rule. You won't be able to achieve it through NAT rules or NAT rules. And destination inbound rule is not correct. So the correct answer is application rules. Application rules define fully qualified domain names or FQDNs that can be accessed from a subnet. That would be appropriate to allow a Windows Update network traffic. All right, so that concludes the review questions for Module 4. I hope the information provided was useful. In the next video, we're going to start a brand new module. This module is called Inter-Site Connectivity. And the first lesson on that is VNet peering. So I will see you on the next video. Till then, take care.